There's nothing rich folks love more.
No. No. Yes.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
We have a very interesting show planned for you today.
That's right. Today's segment focuses on the history of King Louis XIV. Our three main broadcasters, Tina, Morgan, and Megan, will be covering this topic.
They will be covering the Palace of Versailles, the impact that the king had on France and the world at the time, his predecessors and his successors, as well as a day in his court.
Also, there will be two special guest appearances, including King Louis himself.
Now, without any further ado, let's jump right in.
Yo, King Louis XIV here.
Thank you, Anna and Sinclair, for that very warm welcome. Now let's move on to the topic of Louis XIV. First, we're going to talk about a regular day for King Louis XIV. 7:30 to 8 a.m. Sire, it is time. The first valet de chambre wakes the king. Servants come into the bedchamber of the king, who is washed, combed, shaved, and dressed. His breakfast is served. 10 a.m. As they left the king's apartment, a crowd formed in the hall of mirrors. The king sits in the royal chapel to attend mass for about 30 minutes. 11 a.m. The king held council in his cabinet. On Sundays and Wednesdays, there was a council of state. Tuesdays and Saturdays were devoted to the Royal Council of Finances. And finally, on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, there might be an extra council of state to replace a dispatch council or a religious council. 1 p.m. In his bedroom chamber, the king dines alone. This meal was in principle a private one, but Louis XIV used to receive all the men of the court. His afternoons. At 2 p.m., the king gave his orders announcing his intentions for the afternoon. If he wished, it was in the gardens, or hunting, or in the surrounding woodland. At 6 p.m., often Louis XIV let his son decide over the indoor entertainments. Meanwhile, he would send the many letters prepared by his secretary. During the evenings, or around 10 p.m., the crowd enters the king's apartments to attend the royal grand public supper. The king would sit at the table, surrounded by members of the royal family. Then he would withdraw to his cabinet to converse more freely with his family and very few close acquaintances. 11:30. The retiring. A public ceremonial where the king withdrew to his bedroom for the night.
Thank you so much, Tina, for the wonderful description of Louis XIV's life.
Now here's Megan with some information on the Palace of Versailles.
When Louis XIV first decided to build a new palace and move his court out of Paris, there was nothing on his chosen site at Versailles but a fairly small hunting lodge. The residence was transformed into an immense and extravagant complex showing the over-the-top excesses of the French nobility. This incredible palace is located in the city of Versailles, 16 kilometers west-southwest of Paris. Thanks to the team of Louis XIV, the architect, André Lenotre, the landscape designer, and Charles Lebrun, the fashionable interior decorator, Louis XIV's enormous and stylish palace was completed 21 years after it was begun in 1661, allowing Louis, along with his closest friends, family, courtiers, servants, and soldiers, all 20,000 of them, to officially set up court there. The palace has 700 rooms, 2,153 windows, and takes up 67,000 square meters of floor space. That is over 12 American football fields. Above anything else, Versailles was meant to emphasize Louis's importance. After all, this is the guy that called himself the Sun King, as in everything revolves around him. By building Versailles, Louis shifted the seat of French government away from the feuding, gossiping, troublemaking noble families in Paris. He had the whole palace and its massive gardens built along an east and west axis so the sun would rise and set in alignment with his home. He filled both the palace and its gardens with sculptures, paintings, and fountains that all focused on himself. When you walk through the palace at Versailles, you're bombarded with room after room of marble and gold paintings. Ceiling paintings place Louis in the company of Greek gods, along with him in huge formal curly wigs, staring at you wherever you go. In addition, there is gold everywhere, so you don't forget how wealthy the King of France was. He was so rich that he spent around $5 million on buttons over the 54 years of his reign. That's an average of almost $100,000 a year on only buttons. Of the 700 rooms inside the palace, there are a few notable ones that serve very particular functions. The king's official state bedroom is one where the rising and going to sleep rituals would be performed each day. Both involved a whole host of courtiers waiting on the king while he got up or went to bed, following strict rules of position and rank to determine who got to perform which parts of the ceremony. Did you know the palace's layout was revolved around the king? His private chamber is located exactly in the middle of the palace, demonstrating that everything does revolve around him. The queens of France who lived at Versailles were the focus of a similar ritual called the toilette in the queen's main bedchamber, a room where they also gave birth in public. The symmetrical Salon of War and Salon of Peace are decorated with paintings highlighting France's military might and the benefits of living calmly under a tranquil ruling government. The most famous room is the Hall of Mirrors, which runs along the entire length of the central building. One wall contains a row of large windows looking over nearly 2,000 acres of manicured lawns, fountains, and paths arranged in the formal garden style that André Lenotre is known for. The other wall is covered with 357 mirrors that catch the rising sun rays inside the palace that remind us again of Louis XIV's power. Although the room is over the top, it was mainly used as a passageway. The palace's outside is not as elaborate as its inside, but it is still huge and has plenty of gold, statues, and embellishments. The basic structure is classical. It's symmetrical, repetitive, and based on simple elements that are directly borrowed from ancient Greek temples. Classical architecture was the name of the game at Versailles, and although it wasn't as complicated as some of Louis XIV's other choices, he was making a direct link from himself all the way back to the great thinkers and builders of the ancient classical past. The ground floor of the central building was reserved for key members of the royal family. The private apartments of the queen and the living quarters of the captain of the guard are also found on the ground floor. The first floor of the central building houses the lavish apartments of the king and queen, as well as numerous salons for entertaining guests and members of court. The Bull's-Eye Salon, named for its distinctive oval window, was the anteroom where courtiers waited until the king rose. It leads to the bedroom in which Louis XIV died. To the east of the palace is the Place d'Armes. In the center of the Place d'Armes, facing the Avenue de Paris, is a bronze statue of Louis XIV. Originally located in the apex of the Court of Honor, the statue was relocated to the Place d'Armes in 2009 after an extensive restoration. To the west is the Gate of Honor that marks the main entrance to the palace's complex. Beyond that lies the broad expanse of the Court of Honor, constructed in the 1680s to house the king's secretaries of state. In the north wing, the palace chapel rises above the rest of the grounds. The chapel hosted daily masses as well as royal weddings and baptisms. The north wing also contains galleries, salons, and apartments. The gardens of Versailles were planned by André Lenotre, perhaps the most famous and influential landscape architect in French history. Behind the palace, the ground falls away on every side from a terrace adorned with ornamental basins, statues, and bronze groups. Directly west of the terrace is the Latona Fountain. The fountain depicts the events of Ovid's Metamorphoses. The Royal Walk extends westward from the palace. A broad avenue centered on the grass of the green carpet is flanked by rows of large trees and ends at the spectacular Fountain of Apollo. Beyond the fountain, the walk is continued by the Grand Canal, a 60-meter wide and 1.6-kilometer long waterway. To the south of the terrace, raised flower beds lead to a pair of staircases that flank the orangery. The orangery includes more than 1,000 trees. Palm, pomegranate, lemon, and orange are among the varieties represented. Beyond the orangery is the Swiss Lake, an artificial lake that replaced a stretch of problematic marshland that was known to the ancient regime as the Sinking Pond. North of the terrace, manicured ornamental gardens slope down to the water walk, a path lined with bronze sculptures and geometric topiaries bordered by imposing hedgerows. The path concludes at the Dragon Fountain, which features a spray of water that rises nearly 90 feet or 27 meters into the air. Beyond this lies the Neptune Fountain. The crescent-shaped fountain is remarkable for its fine sculptures and the enormous volume of water projected by its 99 jets. The Palace of Versailles is truly beautiful and one of a kind. Although there is lots more rooms that could be discussed and things to be talked about, the bottom line is that it is truly a beautiful palace and everybody should get to see it.
Here's Reese with an exclusive tour of the Palace of Versailles.
Welcome to the magnificent Palace of Versailles, also known as Château de Versailles. It is one of the most, if not the most, famous royal places in the world. Not surprisingly, Château de Versailles has gotten its name from the surrounding city. When the chateau was built, Versailles was a mere country village. Today, however, it is a suburb of Paris and one of France's most popular tourist destinations. The palace has housed the royal court several times and is therefore not only famous as a building, but also as a symbol of the system of absolute monarchy. The history of the palace starts with the Sun King, Louis XIV. He had grown up during the disorder of the Fronde, a short civil war between rival fractions of aristocrats. For this reason, the newly appointed king wanted a center where he could organize and completely control a government of France by absolute personal rule. The place he chose for his new palace was the Royal Hunting Lodge, located in the small village of Versailles. Louis XIV quickly became more or less obsessed with his new palace and spent the majority of his time and effort on it. What started as a hunting lodge was soon to become one of the largest palaces in the world. The construction and expansion of the palace was done through 4 distinct building campaigns over a 50-year period. The first campaign started in the mid-17th century and was initiated because Louis was about to host a major party for the 2 queens of France. During this phase, the palace witnessed alterations in both the building and gardens in order to accommodate the 600 guests invited to the party. The second building campaign started a few years later. During this campaign, the palace began to assume some of the appearance that it has today. This phase included the construction of several apartments and lodging facilities, including the classic Grand Appartement du Roi. The third campaign began some 10 years later. During this phase, the Palace of Versailles acquired much of the look that it has today, including the brilliant Hall of Mirrors. It was at this time, in 1682, that Louis XIV officially installed his court at Versailles. By moving his court and government to Versailles, Louis hoped to extract more control of the government from the nobility. By now, all the power of France emanated from this center. The government officers were moved here, as well as the homes of thousands of courtiers and their retinues. With this, the village of Versailles grew very quickly. Louis XIV undertook his last building campaign at Versailles at the start of the 18th century. The fourth building campaign concentrated almost exclusively on construction of the royal chapel, as well as some modifications in the appartement du roi. After the death of Louis XIV in 1715, the 5-year-old king, Louis XV, with his court, returned to Paris, but they would return a few years later. During the reign of the new king, Versailles underwent transformation, but not on the scale that had been seen during the reign of his father. The same was true for his successor, Louis XVI. Much of his contributions to Versailles were largely dictated by the unfinished projects left to him by his grandfather. Not surprisingly, Château de Versailles lost its function as a royal palace after the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century. The temporary government in charge, the National Convention, arranged for the majority of the palace furniture to be either sold or rented. Only items of particular artistic or intellectual value were exempt from this sale. These items were consigned to be part of the collection of a museum, which had been planned at the time of the sale of the palace furnishings. During the time of the Revolution, with Napoleon Bonaparte, the Bourbon Restoration and the Second Empire, the palace received little attention. It was primarily used for different state events and during visits by political and royal foreigners. It was not until after the Second World War that the palace once again received some attention, this time in the form of renovations. A major project was initiated in the mid-20th century in an attempt to bring it back to its former glory and to once again put it on the world map. A new roof to the Hall of Mirrors was added, and several chambers and apartments were restored. Additionally, a policy was established in which the French government would aggressively seek to acquire as much of the original furniture and artwork as possible, as much had been dispersed at the time of the Revolution. Today, the palace is considered one of the very finest examples of French architecture and one of France's most famous structures.
Wow! Thank you, Megan. I sure do want to visit the Palace of Versailles now.
As do I, Sinclair, as do I. But we're not done yet. Now we have Morgan with some gossip about King Louis's predecessors and successors. Spill the tea, Morgan.
King Henry IV was Louis XIV's grandfather. He became the King of France after marrying Maria de Medici. Once Henry IV became king, he converted to the Catholic faith, even though he was raised Protestant. He converted to the Catholicism because it brought an upward to France because he was Protestant. Even though he tried to stay true with his new faith, he still did not agree with the persecution of the Protestant people. In 1589, he issued the Edicts of Nantes, which his grandson Louis XIV destroyed. Henry IV gave the Protestant people rights to practice their own religion in peace. King Louis XIII was Louis XIV's father. He ruled France in 1610 till 1643. His mother, Maria Medici, served as a regent till King Louis XIII was of age. After a while, King Louis XIII became of age. He exiled his mother because she wanted to stay into control of France. He married Princess of Spain, Anne of Austria, to gain alliance with her country, even though he was not quite fond of her. Louis XIII ruled through mental instability and chronic ill health. In the end of his life, he was known for being one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. Queen Anne of Austria was Louis XIV's mother. France was not fond of her when she first married King Louis XIII when she was only 14. Only when she gave birth to two sons, Louis XIV and Philip de France, did France truly start liking their queen. Throughout the war between France and Spain, Anne stayed true to her country of France, but truly felt sympathetic with her brother, King of Spain. After Louis XIII's death, Anne of Austria served as a regent with the help of Jules Mazarini until her son was of age. Anne of Austria was a smart and cunning woman until her death, January 20th, 1666, of breast cancer.
The tea has been spilt. Thank you, Morgan.
Well, that's it for tonight. See you all next time.